Does everyone have a copy of this? Should be passed around the room. Is there enough to go around? So, being that this is the class of Moshiach Gula, and this week we're approaching Shabbos Zochor, getting ready for Purim. So I want to bring in a little bit of the connection between Purim, Moshiach, and Zochor, and what's this week Parsha Zochor. So let's see. We'll start with this. This is what you're looking at is a Mamar written by the previous Rebbe. There's a book called Chassid Discourses, and it's interesting. This Mamar was written, and there were 5 years from 1940 to 1945. These were the years of the Second World War, when the Holocaust was occurred. During these years, the previous Rebbe gave out a magazine called Akriya V'Akdusha. It started there with the war and then ended after the war. For some reason or other, it wasn't done before or after. And in this magazine, which was a monthly magazine, it was a mimer. It wasn't said, it was written by the previous Rebbe, and it was written in Yiddish, which means the intention was to be written in a simple way that everybody should be able to understand it, even people who are not so knowledgeable with Torah. In those days, Yiddish was the language that most Jews spoke. So there's a part here that relates to Purim, a mimer that relates to Purim. But I want to give the introduction, and that is that there are a few times throughout history that we celebrate a time of Geula. Of course, the first is Pesach. We went out of Mitzrayim. Then there's another time, which is Purim. And then there's another time, which is Hanukkah. We had a miracle that we went out of Galus during Hanukkah time. And then the next one will be when Moshiach comes. So even though these are all different times in history, and each one is a different story, but they're all connected. In fact, in the dream that Yaakov had, where he saw a ladder, and the ladder had 4 rungs, one of the explanations of this dream is that the 4 rungs represent the 4 stages of redemption. In other words, one rung is when the Jewish people were redeemed from the Golus of Mitzrayim. One rung is when they were redeemed from the Golus in the times of Purim. The other rung is when they were redeemed in the time of Hanukkah. And the 4th rung is when we'll be redeemed in the times of Mashiach. Now, so if you think of it, if this is like a ladder, in a ladder, the 4 rungs are not just disconnected and disjointed rungs. They're all connected. That's how I'm climbing. First I climb here, then I climb higher, then I go higher, and eventually I get to the top. That means that all the redemptions that we went through are part of a process. And each one brings us to the sort of next level. So one of them is, of course, Purim. So all the redemptions are connected, and Purim is one of the stages of redemption. And here we learn a little bit in this mimer about what happened in those days and what we can learn from that regarding us. So there's a pasuk in the Megillah that reads, "V'kibel haYehudim es asher achelu lases," and the Jews took upon themselves that which they begun to do. The Gemara comments, at that time when the miracle of Purim took place, the Yidden fulfilled that which they had undertaken to do a long time before, which means that the Jewish people repented and resolved to observe all that we pledged to do when the Torah was given. And now he describes, when the Purim took place, Jews were to be found in every corner of Achashverosh's kingdom, because Achashverosh ruled over the whole world, and the Yidden were all over, so they were all under his rulership. From time to time, these Jews became more distant from observance of mitzvahs. There are 2 reasons given as to what caused this spiritual degradation. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says, our spiritual downfall came as a result of the opinion held by many during the time of King Nebuchadnezzar that man's greatest glory lies in achieving physical perfection. Man, they believed, was used to use his intellect and skills to further develop the world. And this was also the foundation of Nebuchadnezzar's philosophy. He was the king of Babylon. All about self-glorification. And this is what's meant by Reb Shimon bar Yochai. When they ask him what caused the reason for this sin, it says they bowed to an icon of Nebuchadnezzar. Bowing implies, physically bowing means bending your head. But figuratively speaking, what does bowing mean? Permitting another's opinion to supersede your own opinion. This ill-grounded logic, which is that the world and my purpose in this world has nothing to do with Hashem, nothing to do with spirituality. It's all about me using my intellect, my skills, and it's all physical, material. This led many Jews to desecrate the Shabbos and profane the Torah and the mitzvahs. That's one opinion. The second opinion is that the spiritual downfall was a result of a cordial relationship that existed between the Jews and the Persians, the Medes and the Babylonians. These were the nations at that time that the Jewish people enjoyed extremely close ties to the royal court and enjoyed non-kosher royal banquets. This led them to further distance themselves from Torah and mitzvahs. What caused that? How come they assimilated? What was the reason for their assimilation? So he says like this: this happened several years before the redemption from Babylonian exile. So I have to give an introduction. I did prepare a sheet to help you understand this better, but I forgot to make copies for everybody. So if you're sitting near someone that has this, you can look at in the booklet. It's page 22A and 22B. The Yidden, the Beis Hamikdash, when Purim happened, was after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed by the Babylonians. I know for some people it's so confusing what happened, when, where. So I'll try as much as possible to make it clear, the historic background. The Babylonians destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. That's the first Beis Hamikdash. And the Yidden were told that they're going to be in exile for 70 years. This happened before. It says clearly, the prophet said, if you don't change, the Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed. You'll be taken away in exile for 70 years. And that's what happened. It was destroyed. They were taken in exile for 70 years. But the 70 years were over, and they saw that the exile is not ending. And that was very discouraging. So some of the Jews came to the conclusion that obviously this prophecy is not going to be fulfilled. They didn't believe in the words of the Navi, and therefore they didn't believe that we're ever going to go out of this. And don't forget that Babylon, these were world powers. These were mighty kings, and they ruled the world. And now we're under their rulership. Look what they did. They destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. So they were under the impression that there's no way out. In English, they say, if you can't beat them, join them. So basically, if we're stuck here, we might as well not stand out like a sore thumb, but go with the flow and be like everybody else and be accepted by everybody else. So the source of their willingness to assimilate and go with the flow and be like everybody else was because they believed that we're never going out of Golus. The prophecy is not going to be fulfilled, and that's it. What really happened? There was a prophecy of 70 years. So if you look at the two charts that I gave you on page 22 and 22A and B, on the first one, which is 22A, it shows you that the Golus, the destruction, the Beis Hamikdash, all these things didn't happen in one shot. There were a few stages. So look, for example, where it says, it has the years, the Jewish year and the secular year. So you see, these 10 tribes went to exile. These other 2 more tribes went to exile. The last 10 tribes went to exile. And then it says Yerushalayim was conquered. Look at the year 3319. Yerushalayim was conquered. And then only much later, 3338, that's when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So the mistake that they made was they counted 70 years from an earlier period. They didn't count it from when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. They counted from when Yerushalayim was conquered the first time. And according to their calculations, the 70 years was over. And it didn't happen. So if you turn the page to 22b, it shows you that in the year 3390, it appeared that the Galus had ended. So Zerubbabel, who was the leader of the Jewish people, he led them back to Eretz Yisrael. They started to build the second base of English, so it looked like, wow, okay, it's over. And then everything was stopped. And they realized, no, it's not happening. Look, we thought we were going to build it. We thought that it's over. We were prohibited to continue building it. In other words, things actually began to happen, but it didn't continue. So they took it as a sign that we're not going out of Golus. And basically, that's what led to the assimilation. And that's what led to the decree of Purim. So it happens to be that if you look at this chart, a few years after the story of Purim, 2 years after the story, they already started to rebuild the second base of Mikdash. And a few years later, it was completed, and the Jews went back to Eretz Yisrael, and the redemption took place. So he's explaining now what happened, and what happened on a spiritual plane. Let's go back to these words. Satan, may heaven protect us, began to agitate the Jewish people to sin. Satan is the angel that his mission is to get us to sin. What was his intention? That by getting the Jews to sin, Hashem would, heaven forbid, next page, continue to allow them to languish in Golus. The Jewish people, unable to withstand the tests, succumb to the temptation. In other words, there was sort of a spiritual force that was motivating them to commit sin, because the Satan knows that once Moshiach comes, he's out of business. Basically, he's bankrupt. So he wants to continue to go on with his life like everybody else. So he's trying to keep us in Golus. Mordechai and the members of the Sanhedrin tried to stem the tide of rebellion, but to no avail. A number of impudent and insolent individuals placed themselves at the head of these irreligious factions. They scoffed at any effort to get the Jews to do tshuva. Mordechai and the Sanhedrin attempted to get the Jews to do tshuva by relating to them the glad tidings of redemption from the Babylonian exile. They were saying to them, the redemption is coming soon. We're all going back to Yerushalayim. We're going to have the second base of Mikdash soon. And that was going to be the hope and the good news that hopefully would make them forget about Achashverosh, forget about the Persians, and go back to your nation. But because of the mockery of these people who were really the messengers of the Satan, these were regular people, but obviously they were people who were not the way they should be, and the Satan used them as his messengers to influence some of the better Jews that up until that time they sincerely believed in the coming of the redemption. But after listening to the non-religious leaders, they began to have doubts. The situation was further exasperated by the fact that aside from Mordechai and some members of the Sanhedrin, nobody ventured to speak about the coming of redemption. In other words, first of all, there was a group of people that didn't believe, and they were telling everybody, don't believe in it. In addition to that, there were people who were okay, and they were rabbis or leaders, but they didn't talk about it. They were mute on the subject. It was impossible for them to say that the redemption won't be coming because they believed in it firmly. But they were uncertain as to when it would take place. So therefore, they couldn't talk and tell everybody it's happening soon. How do we know it's happening soon? Who says it's happening now? They also, and the reason is because the 70 years are over and it still didn't happen. They also didn't believe that Mordechai and the members of Sanhedrin knew the appointed time. Number one, they weren't sure. They had their doubts. Number two, they doubted whether Mordechai really knows. He's telling everybody it's happening soon. Does he really know? How does he know that it's happening soon? And they therefore remained completely silent about the matter. Now everyone knows that silence, people think being silent means I'm not taking any side, but it's not true. There's certain situations when you're silent, you're making a statement. And that's what happened here. Their silence lent strength to the words of the Satan's messengers. In other words, the people who were against Mordechai, and they made fun of this idea that you're telling everybody that the redemption is coming soon. Now that other leaders were quiet, it enabled them to make more fun of Mordechai and the Sanhedrin, because look, nobody else is saying this. And that would lead the Jewish people further down the sinful path of eating forbidden foods, desecrating the Shabbos, marrying non-Jews. And in turn, this brought about an even greater proximity between the Jewish people and the other inhabitants. This silence of the believers, again, these are people who believe, but they were silent. They didn't feel comfortable to come out and say the redemption is coming soon. It brought shadows of doubt in the Jewish population at large. And these doubts and uncertainties manifested themselves in various ways. Some Jews, for example, totally abandoned belief in the redemption. And they abandoned belief in Torah and mitzvahs. In other words, once you have doubt about one part of Yiddishkeit, then you say, who says the rest of it is true? And suddenly you find yourself doubting and abandoning everything else. While adhering to some aspects of Torah mitzvahs, they lost a certain degree of faith in the coming of redemption, and in various matters became close to those other leaders who were totally against Yiddishkeit. So it was that the Jews of that time were sinking into the depth of sin. This came about through the corrupt influence of these leaders who denied the existence of Hashem. They denied the validity of the Torah, and also as a result of the good people that were silent on the subject of redemption. He doesn't say this here, but I think we're going to stop here. It doesn't say this here, but it says in the Medrash that one of the things that made Haman very angry was he heard that in spite of the fact that there was a decree not to study Torah, Mordechai gathered 22,000 children, not a few kids, 22,000 children, and he was studying Torah with them. And he went to see it with his own eyes. Could he really be doing that? And sure enough, there was Mordechai with 22,000 children learning Torah. And he got so angry. And he said, when I kill them, I'm going to start with the children first. That enraged him more than anything else. It's interesting. By Hashem, that was the opposite. That's what brought Hashem to say, I'm going to cancel the decree. By Haman, the Rasha, that was the worst thing when he saw that the children are the ones that are loyal. The children are dedicated. That's one thing. Another thing, what were they studying? Which laws were they studying? Shabbos, Kashrus, what? Yeah, they were studying laws related to the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, here you are, that people don't believe the redemption is coming. As a result of that, they are assimilating. On top of that, Haman comes out with a decree that has never, ever been before or after, the worst decree possible. And what is Mordechai doing? Not only is telling them, Moshiach, not Moshiach, we didn't call it Moshiach then, but the redemption is coming. Not only he told them, he said, listen, let's get ready for the Beis Hamikdash. How are we going to do this? Now we're going to do that. To them, this was absurd. Your end is coming, and you're talking about the Beis Hamikdash. On Mordechai's end, it was just the opposite. He and the children demonstrated that they're so certain and so positive, and they have so much trust in the words of Hashem and the Navi that the redemption is going to come after 70 years, that we're already preparing how we're going to do the service in the Beis Hamikdash. And that's what got Haman crazy. How could they have such amunah? I'm doing everything to get rid of that amunah, and they're still so strong. So, if you take what it says here and think of how this relates to us today, it's a pretty similar situation. And that is that it's a time of Galus, and yet the Rebbe came out to say that the coming of Moshiach is imminent, and we should do everything we can to get ready and for Mashiach. And of course, Baruch Hashem, there are tens of thousands of Yidden that are out there doing that. And that's giving us hope in spite of everything that's going on. What gives us the feeling of hope and confidence, and not to chas v'shalom fall apart from all the craziness that's going on, especially in the recent year. In fact, in a few days, we can say it's mamash a year since it all began. I know in this neighborhood, which was one of the first in the United States, it all started Purim time. So it's almost a year that this craziness is going on a global level, in a very confusing level. It's a year later, and still there's so much confusion. We don't know where it's going, what it's doing. We don't understand the pattern, how it works. Is this, when it comes to you ask a doctor, a question says, well, we really don't know. A year later, you still don't know? No. We thought it only works one way. We find out it works this way. We thought only this could happen. We find out that could happen. Yes, take the vaccine. Don't take the vaccine. It's a confused world. But what gives us the strength is that we have the message that Rebbe told us that the Moshiach is coming and it's imminent. And in fact, all the things that are going on, even the craziness that's going on, is part of the process leading up to Moshiach. And that is what's supposed to give us the strength. And on the other hand, there are forces out there that are trying to make us lose that emunah and to make us lose that. And that force was the Satan. But in those days, it was embodied in this person called Haman. In fact, it's an interesting thing. I just mentioned to you before, after the story of Purim, how much time did they wait until the actual redemption began? 2 years. 2 years later, they started to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, and this time it was built completely, and it stood for another 420 years. So if you think of it, it's an interesting thing. Right before the actual redemption, the worst kind of decree in history took place, which teaches us not to be discouraged and not to chas v'shalom think of this, that this is some sort of a sign of a setback when you see things happening in a negative way. Look at Purim. Right before the actual redemption, chas v'shalom, anything like this should be repeated. But then it was the worst kind of decree happened, not in the beginning of the 70 years, in the middle, but only at the end, 2 years before the actual, because that was the real calculation when the 70 years were over. So now let's understand a little bit. So what's Haman? Where does Haman play part in this picture? So those of you who have the booklet from level 2, I'm going to use sheets that are in the booklet. And for whoever doesn't have the booklet, we have these sheets. I'm going to give this out. You can pass this around. So let's look a little bit about Amalek. So this Shabbos is Shabbos Parsha Zochor, which means it's a mitzvah to read this parsha. And the reason is it is a mitzvah to wipe out the memory of Amalek, this nation. And Haman was a descendant of Amalek. There was a king called Shaul. If we have time, we'll read about that. But in this Shabbos, in the Haftorah, we're going to read about the story with Shaul. He was commanded by the Navi that the time has come to wipe out Amalek, but he didn't do it completely the way he was told. As a result of that, even though everybody was wiped out, there was one person alive, and that one person had a child, and that child was the ancestor of Haman, who later threatened to destroy the whole Jewish nation. So on this Shabbos, we read, in fact, there's certain opinions that hold that Shabbos you have to go to shul, and you must hear the reading of the Parsha Zochor, because it's a mitzvah to read about wiping out Amalek. Some opinions say that if you listen to the Megillah on Purim, you could be yotze of this obligation, because the Megillah is also about Amalek. It's about Haman. So let me just go over just to know it from the source. There's a few places in Torah about this. One of them is in the Parsha of this is, if you look on top, it says Bamidbar, chapter 24, is a parsha of Balak. And it says that the prophet Bilam looked ahead in prophecy and he saw Amalek. And he said, Reish is goyim Amalek. Amalek was the first of the nations to attack you, and his fate will be everlasting destruction. That's one pasuk. Then there's another pasuk, turn the page. And those of you who have the, in the booklet, I'm being very confusing here, hope not. But anyway, in the booklet, I'm going to, in the sheets that I gave out, it's page 8. What? Sorry. In the booklet, it's page 8. It has the same numbers, page 8. This is a Pasha we just read, Pasha B'Shalach. That's when the Jews were attacked by Amalek. Moshe said to Yeshua, choose people and go out and attack Amalek. That's Pasuk 9. And then you take a look again on Pasuk 14. And Hashem said to Moshe, inscribe this as a memorial in the book. Recite this into Yeshua's ears, that I will surely obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens, or erase them completely. Pasuk 16, and Hashem said, there is a hand on the throne of the eternal, which means it's like Hashem took an oath. He picked up his hand and he said, this is a war against Amalek from generation to generation. Let's go to page 9. Page 9 is another place in the Torah, Parshas Kiseitze. And we also say this every day in davening. Remember to get rid of Amalek. He's the one who, on the way out of Egypt, he attacked you. And how on the way you were going out of Egypt, he cut off all, there's something missing here, all the stragglers at the back, and when you were faint and weary and did not fear Hashem. So again, Pasuk 19, it says that you should obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens. Do not forget. Yeah.
I'm just a bit confused with that.
Baruch Hashem, only a bit. That's very good news. Yeah.
If Haman is descendant of Amalek and his descendants converted to Judaism, does that mean as Amalek in Jews?
There's a question that's asked, how is it possible that his descendants, the Gemara says that the descendants of Amalek were actually teaching Torah publicly in Bnei Brak? So the question is, how could he have descendants that became Jewish if Amalek's descendants are not allowed? I mean, Amalek, anyone from Amalek can't be accepted as a convert. So the good news is there's an answer. The bad news is I don't remember the answer, but there is an answer to the question.
And another thing, in high school, I learned a concept that Amalek isn't actually a race. It's like an ideology. Like it's a set of like a mindset, and we should be eradicating that mindset.
So
the mindset was of people.
So what you said is partly true, partly not true. It is an actual race. They're actually a group of people. They are descendants of a man called Amalek. Mr. Amalek was a descendant of Esav, and this was a nation. But what we're supposed to eradicate, and the reason why we're supposed to eradicate these people is because they have in them a certain klipa, a certain mindset, which is very evil and destructive. And if we then not destroy, that will destroy the rest of the world. So therefore, they have to be erased. But yes, right now, the mitzvah doesn't apply to people because we don't even know who Amalek is. But the klipa that they possess, which is that mindset that you're talking about, or in simple words, the Yetzer Hara, the klipa of Amalek, is something which we have to erase from within ourselves.
Right.
And what is it? So I'm just showing you another thing on page 10, where there's a positive commandment and a negative. This is from the Rambam. Number 188 is a positive commandment to the extinction of Amalek. And 189 is another positive commandment to always remember the deeds of Amalek. On page 11, you have from the Siddur that every day we say, remember what Amalek did. And then the other pages is the story with Shaul. I don't think we have the time to go into it, but I want to explain a little bit. So what is this Amalek? What is it? So basically, what you mentioned in the beginning, Amalek is Gematria Suffolk, which means the numerical value of the word Amalek is 240. And the numerical value of the word Suffolk is also 240. And this indicates that that's the klipa of Amalek, doubt. In other words, there are different kind of Yetzer Haras. There's a Yetzer Hara that drives us to steal, a Yetzer Hara that drives us to eat food that's not kosher. There's a Yetzer Hara that drives us to get involved in relationships that are not kosher. There are different kinds of Yetzer Haras. This Yetzer Hara doesn't tell me to do an Aveira, doesn't tell me to do anything wrong. This Yetzer Hara just comes along and says, are you sure? It's a small little voice. You learn something in Torah. The Rebbe said this and this, and he said, For real? I'm just asking. No, of course I believe. I'm just saying, where's the proof? How do you know? I just want to make sure that it's sure. These words, the doubt, that klipa, it comes from a malik, which means, the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that the truth of the matter is that every yid naturally has a mun in Hashem. There's a force, and there's a klipa, a force of impurity that is in the world, and we have it within ourselves. And its function is to throw doubts in our minds, which means we're doubting Hashem, doubting Torah, doubting mitzvahs, and doubting any of the things we have to have a faith in. And in fact, I remember seeing from the Rebbe that not only Yiddishkeit, doubt in general is a product of Amalek. There are people who are obsessed with doubt in general. In general, should I buy this? Should I buy that? Everyone has these questions. But by some people, it's a sort of an obsession. They can't make up their mind, and they could be standing in a store and not decide whether to choose this or that for 16 hours, approximately, because they can't make up their mind. They're in doubt. So I guess having doubts is normal, but if it's excessive, then this is coming from a mali. Yep.
What do you mean the product of Amalek? Like it's in us, we have a little bit of it, or?
It means just like physically, if something manifests in the person physically, I have a rash, I have a headache, what we say is there's an infection in the body, somewhere, someplace, that's causing pain in my ears or pain in my head or a skin rash or whatever it may be. When I'm acting a certain way, there's also a spiritual infection, spiritual germ, spiritual bacteria that's inside me. That's what we mean when we say the word klipa. And that's what's causing me to act in a certain way, to be driven to do certain things. If I get rid of the klipa, if I'm able to get rid of that negative force inside me, I want to have that drive that I'm feeling now. What is the drive? So there are different drives because there are different kinds of yitzaharas. One of those drives is having doubt, entertaining thoughts of doubt. And that means that's the infection. The infectious disease doctor would have to diagnose. He said this infection is called Amalek infection. That's the name of it. It's a spiritual infection, a spiritual bacteria, and it causes to have doubts.
Doesn't doubt like drive us to have questions and try to find out more about God?
There's two kinds of questions. I was once in a class where someone was teaching someone, and someone said, but I don't understand. No. And the teacher says, how dare you question God? This is what it says in the Torah. You have no right to question. What's the difference? I mean, the whole Yiddishkeit, the whole Torah is based on questions and answers. Every Rashi, every commentary, every line in Gemara is questions. So how could you say something wrong with the question? So there's two kinds of questions. There's one kind of question is where I want to understand. And there's another kind of question where I'm challenging whether what Rashi says is true or not, what the Torah says is true. To challenge whether the Torah is true or not is heresy. But to have a question I want to understand, not only it's okay, it's encouraged.
Does a bad kind of question drive some people to Teshuvah?
A bad question?
Like the like challenging, like I don't believe how like okay, for example, like I'm just thinking of an example, like college students that are Jewish that are completely atheist, and then like they get into like a band like an argument with like the rabbi, and sometimes the rabbi might say something, and they're like, hold on.
Well,
maybe there's some truth to this.
Of course, you can't tell someone.
They started off with challenging.
Of course, you can't tell someone who grew up without Yiddishkeit, don't ask any questions.
Right.
There's no way, and don't challenge, because there's no way they'll even come near Yiddishkeit. For them, it's positive. It depends where you're coming from. And even a person who grew up with Yiddishkeit, if they have questions which is challenging, they should deal with it. They have to deal with it in the proper way. But I'm saying when you say to me, is a question a good thing or a bad thing? Don't we always ask questions in the Torah? So I'm telling you, the questions in the Torah that are positive and are encouraged is questions I want to understand what the Torah says. The other kind of question, which is I'm not accepting what the Torah says, I'm challenging what the Torah says, and that's different. So basically, when it comes to Purim and this Parsha Zochor, that means this is the time in the year that Hashem gives us the strength to, just like then, to get rid of Haman and Amalek. It means now Hashem gives us an injection, a a medical injection, but it's a spiritual injection to get rid of that negative trait within me to have doubts. It weakens that Yetzer Hara. There's a story with a chassid who became one of the biggest chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. And how did it happen? He was once in shul, and he was observing somebody who was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Majeski. That Shabbos was Shabbos Zochor, and they're reading about Amalek. And he's watching this person, and he can't believe. He sees on his face a lot of emotions going through. So he walks over to him after davening, and he says, "Tell me, what did Amalek do to you that you seem to hate him more than anyone else in the whole shul?" So he explained to him, because most people, when they read about Amalek, it's something of the past, something that happened, and this is a nation that did such and such. But when you learn it according to Chassidus, no, it's something that I have in me, and I have to get rid of it in me. And he told him what it's all about, and he was so inspired that he began to study Chassidus, and he ended up becoming one of the biggest Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. And that's basically what's supposed to happen Shabbos and Purim. It's the opportunity to get rid of that inyan of doubt. The question is how? How do you get rid of doubt? I have a doubt. What am I supposed to do? So the answer is, again, depends who, where you're coming from. So sometimes what you said is actually the doubt to me would be a catalyst to know more about Yiddishkeit, because there are people, you walk into a room and you talk about something and you say, "You have any questions?" "No." "Fine." "Yeah." "Anything bother you what I said?" "No, it's okay." It's a certain coldness. That's also a mother, by the way, just cold, complacent, nothing matters. But this person's not going to move anywhere. Then you have another person in the crowd says, "Rabbi, you don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't make any sense. It's absolute nonsense." Oh, this guy got something to work with. The fact that they're arguing, and the fact that they're questioning, and the fact that they're challenging could bring this person to see what the Torah has to say. Then it could be a very positive thing. But if a person knows, sometimes you know within yourself, I don't really have these doubts, but I'm getting these thoughts. What do I do? So we need more time to talk about it. But just to finish off with something, is that Alter Rebbe says this in Tanya, that thoughts of doubts, the way to, generally speaking, get rid of it is by not giving it attention. Doubts are something that the more you think about it, the more you entertain those thoughts, the more they keep coming back, and the more they keep playing on your mind with the doubts. And you'll see that if you just don't pay any attention to it, it stops coming back and stops attacking you, because it's not a real substance. It's really just a klippa. It's like a person. Imagine a person, an outsider, walks over to you and say, "Why do you do this? And why do you do that?" And you start answering him. And the more you talk to them, the more they engage you in conversation and in debate, and they try to knock it and they try to put it down. But if you want to just get rid of this, ignore this person. Don't answer them. Don't tell them they're right and don't tell them they're wrong. Don't say hello, don't say goodbye. I guarantee you, after a short while, they'll stop talking to you and they'll stop harassing you, and it's over. So basically, the same as with my own thoughts. There's certain things that come to me, I have to work them out, take it apart, analyze it. Some things we can even think about, how can I use this in a positive way, this nature or this energy. Doubts are something which you have to just completely ignore, destroy. Like, don't give it any attention. If you don't give it attention, it'll disappear. Don't feed the cat. Remember we spoke about that? If you don't feed the cat won't be coming back.
What did cat stand for again?
Counterproductive attitudes and thoughts. You know, comes to shidduchim, doubts. Is this the right thing? Is the wrong thing? Finally, you get engaged, you get married, or you're getting ready to get married, and suddenly, did I make the right decision? Did I not? I mean, of course, sometimes there's real things, but very often it's mamish amolik, just doubts that harass me. And if I just don't give them any attention, they'll disappear. Because by feeding them and entertaining these thoughts, they just become stronger and it festers. Okay, so success with getting rid of your amolik. And the main thing is, that's the reverse. And the positive side of the coin is the amuna in Geula should be taken miyad mamish.
Yeah, so there's like